Hello, my name's Connor and I'm Labour's parliamentary candidate here in Altrincham and Sale West for the upcoming general election. To tell you a few things about myself, in my job I run a national campaign against the abuse and violence shop workers receive. I'm raising my young family in South Manchester and my son was born in Wythenshawe Hospital last year on the happiest day of my life. My partner Catherine is a primary school teacher. I'm standing for election here because I believe residents in Altrincham and Sale West need to have an MP who understands the pressures working families have faced over the last few years, and someone who will be a real voice, a real advocate in the next government, which I hope is a strong, competent, reforming Labour government. Growing up at school, all I knew was Labour governments. For the entire time I was at school, I didn't always agree with everything those Labour governments did. But for me, my friends and peers, my whole life was shaped by things like child benefit, child tax credits, maternity pay, paternity leave, educational maintenance allowance, and other measures to help young people. That's why I joined the Labour Party, because of the positive impact it had on my life, and that's the biggest political decision I've ever made. The three most pressing issues facing Altrincham are the state of our National Health Service. We see long waiting lists across the NHS and low patient satisfaction, and that's affecting services at Wythenshawe, at Trafford General. Obviously, Altrincham Minor Injuries Unit has been unable to reopen because of the severity of the shortages. We need more appointments, better access to local dentists, and a real plan to save our NHS, which Labour has. Secondly, the state of our natural environment. It is disgraceful that last year there were 1,483 hours of sewage dumping in Sunderland Brook. We need to clean up our rivers and our waterways, and Labour's plan to make water bosses criminally liable, to impose severe and automatic fines, and to have independent monitoring of outlets would do just that. And thirdly, we need to make sure our streets are safer by cracking down on crime and antisocial behaviour. From my job, I know the impact that has on people. That's why we need more neighbourhood police officers, more visible policing, and town centre patrols to make sure everyone feels comfortable on our streets. The one thing I would like to change about our community is making sure that everyone feels safe on our streets. The most powerful conversation I've had in this campaign, out of hundreds, is the conversation I had with Jane. Jane has two teenage boys, one of whom suffers very severely with asthma. And she told me how he'd been chased by the interchange by a group of young people in balaclavas. He'd nearly collapsed before just making it to the home of a family friend. She told me about the impact that had on her son, on her and their whole family. And that's why I feel so passionately about Labour's pledge to introduce more neighbourhood police officers and the amazing difference I know it will have so that everyone can feel safe on our streets. The very first thing I'd want to do is try to get a grip on the crisis in our broken National Health Service. I'd want to immediately speak to healthcare workers across the constituency, convene a group of them to come with me to Parliament and make sure that Labour's plan to save our NHS was put into force as quickly as possible. Because people on waiting lists are waiting far too long. For those with chronic health conditions, for those with cancer, for many people, The difference between waiting weeks and months is something they simply cannot afford, and we need to get a grip on it quickly. Healthcare will be a massive priority for me and hopefully for a Labour government. Labour has pledged to introduce 40,000 more GP appointments to get a grip on those waiting lists. We need to move to a prevention-led approach. We need more care to be delivered in the community. We must harness the power of technology and support a new hospitals programme and new building. We must reset the relationship between government and members of parliament and NHS staff, and really look carefully at the impact that staffing shortages are having in our NHS, like they're having on Altrincham Hospital. So that's how we would solve the crisis in our National Health Service. When it comes to local house building, I think it's really important that we have a balanced approach that takes on board residents' concerns, that always looks first at using brownfield and urban development sites, but also has ambitious, sustainable house building to address the housing crisis at its heart. And that's why I support the Places for Everyone plan that Trafford Council has developed, first under the Conservative administration and now under the Labour one. I think it's right that those plans have changed significantly through consultation to reduce building in greenbelt areas and to look at enhancements to existing greenbelt, a new rural park and other such measures. But we do need to build more houses because locally there is a housing crisis. We have 8,000 people on housing waiting lists, families living in single rooms in hotels for months on end. And I know that for a lot of people, having a secure home of their own is transformative. I recently was talking to Lara, who'd moved into a housing association house locally. She was able to be close to her family. Her children were able to play in a garden. And I've spoken to lots of people on the doorstep, including a mum last week, Jill, who are really concerned about their children having access to secure housing. Not just about whether they're going to be able to buy their own home locally and live where they've grown up near their family, but even having access to the private rented sector. So we do need to build more housing, and Labour's first time buyer plan will allow more people to get on the housing ladder. School provision, I know, is a massive issue in this area. The last 14 years have seen the scrapping of building schools for the future, major cuts to schools' budgets, alongside significant cuts to local authority funding. And they have created a crisis of school provision, which we are now feeling the effects of. Only Labour recognises that we need a serious plan to recruit and retain more teaching staff as a way to solve that crisis. So our pledge to recruit 6,500 more teachers and look seriously at retention through the teaching framework will help. I support expansion of our local schools. I want every child to have the best possible opportunity in this constituency, and I want to work with all local schools to make that a reality. We need to carefully consider how best our schools and our education system can support all children, including neurodivergent children. And that means making sure that we have the staff we need with the capabilities and training to do that. Classrooms with the adaptations, facilities, technology, and other measures. to make sure that all our children thrive and succeed. Labour has a really strong plan for small businesses, which we launched a few weeks ago. It includes measures that my dad is the director of a small limited company. It includes measures that I know will help business people right across Altrincham and our country. Measures like the introduction of laws to tackle late payments, significant skills reform, including the creation of Skills England and reform of the apprenticeship levy, so young people get the skills they need, guaranteed access to banking, action to boost exports, and other measures. I was really pleased that more than 120 business leaders wrote an open letter supporting Labour's proposals to help businesses and saying that it represented the only platform for sustained long-term economic growth, which is what all our businesses need. The state of our roads, like many of our local services, leaves a lot to be desired. They are crumbling. And the reason is plain. Massive, massive cuts to local authority funding and local services and provisions. Trafford Council has had its budget cut by over 280 million, and we are seeing the effects of that on roads across this constituency. Labour recently announced a new ring-fenced fund to fix 1 million potholes annually in our country. And we are trapped in a vicious cycle, actually, of Conservative MPs going down to Westminster and voting for massive local cuts. I would always fight for fair funding for this area. So I think it's really important that we have sustained action on the climate crisis, which is the biggest global challenge facing our country and our world. But it must be a just transition in a way that brings people with us. And that's why Keir Starmer's confirmation last week that there will be no need for a Manchester clean air zone if Labour win the next general election was an important one. My political hero is Clement Attlee because he showed that it's possible to build great things in difficult times when his government built our National Health Service out of the wreckage of the Second World War. And my favourite album is probably any album by Frank Turner. Love Iron Song is probably my favourite, but I guess in the political world we're in, be more kind is an important message. With a young son, I don't really have much time for reading at the moment. Probably any children's cookbook is the book I'm most grateful for. Maybe What Mummy Makes by Rebecca Wilson. He's become an endless pit for food recently, so that's the book I'm most grateful for at the moment. I'm a big Lord of the Rings fan, and I think a quest to try and defeat all-consuming evil is a good use of time. Me and Catherine are big fans of Wow Yow Chow, particularly their bottomless food and bottomless drink offer, which we've taken advantage of probably a few too many times. My son has had the biggest single influence on my life. Becoming a father has changed me more profoundly than I ever could have imagined. I think people would be surprised to know just how obsessed I am about football. Catherine is always having a go at me for tinkering with my fantasy football team every week during the season. I usually end up with less points after tinkering than I would have done before, so maybe there's a lesson there.